Ah, I see I have intrigued you. Just what is Granny up to? What is sinful science? Am I doing sinful experiments? Or have I learned the errors of my ways? Have I repented and I am now teaching the sins of learning science? You'll just have to stick around and find out. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. Please remember to hit the like button, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe and hit the bell so you'll be notified of new videos. So, what is sinful science? I'll let you decide at the end of the video. It could be how I handle the science in this video, or it could be the way that Answers in Genesis does. You be the judge. Answers in Genesis' new edition of Answers News is entitled Embracing Sin. I decided to respond to it. I was 8 pages into the script and I still didn't even get to the embracing sin part. So this video is only on the first portion, which contains more science than the sin portion that comes later. Next week, I'll get to the sin part. Science isn't my forte, but I decided to take a stab at it. Let me know what you think. Whose science is sinful? Answers in Genesis or mine?
For July the 6th, 2020. So we just celebrated Independence Day here in America while socially distancing from everyone.
So why is it funny to celebrate Independence Day while social distancing? Do you consider it an infringement on your freedom? Was it an infringement on freedom when in World War II the government asked people to plant victory gardens, or when they asked people to participate in air raid drills? If people in the UK had refused to use blackout curtains as required by the government and instead stood outside with flashlights, or torches as they call them, when German planes came to exercise their rights, would we have had a different result? I know this was supposed to be a joke to open the program, but it isn't funny. Our president says that the virus is harmless to all but 1%, completely ignoring the hundreds of thousands that are suffering in hospitals. Those that have had strokes, those with long-term illness that we don't even know yet if will result in permanent injury. He keeps telling us that this will go away. He sounds like someone trying to predict the second coming. It will just go away when the weather gets warmer. It'll go away in April. It'll go away by Easter. Now he's finally realized that it can't be accurate unless he's vague and just says it'll go away, but no longer says when. The virus isn't a joke. Social distancing isn't a joke. And it isn't an infringement on anyone's rights. It's what people that are concerned about the well-being of other people do until the pandemic is over. If these Christians cared about people, they would see that wearing a mask and distancing is about caring more about other people than yourself, something that is in your Bible. I realize that there are some Christian groups that agree with me wholeheartedly on this. It is really a humanitarian issue, not a religious one. If the people at AIG actually believe their Bibles, then they should be good with this too.
And so I'm Dr. Georgia Purdon. This is Dr. Gabriella Haynes, and this is Brian Osborne.
Hey, guys.
We put the non-doctors in the back.
It's like the kids' table. I feel bad. Thanks. Everything weird comes from Australia.
Hey, Brian,
right?
you're going to get in trouble with Ken.
That's true, yeah.
I didn't include the caterpillar story that he's commenting on, but I found this amusing. I wonder if they will now amend the statement that AIG employees must sign as a condition of employment to include not only that they can never disagree with AIG on any position, but they also can't criticize Ken.
Okay, poll. Majority of voters oppose allowing biological males to join women's sports. So we've been hearing a lot about this in the news as to whether people that are transgender should be able to join basically the sport according to the gender they identify with, not the gender that they were born with. And so this poll basically said 60% of people, at least in the US, actually oppose that.
The results from this poll are not surprising when you look at the way the question was phrased. Here it is. The question says nothing about transgender participants. It says, should biological males be allowed to compete in women's sports? Does the question mean to ask, should high school males be allowed to compete in female sports? If that is the intended question, the answer should be no. But if the question is, should transgender females be allowed to participate in women's sports, the answer is yes. But that's not the question they asked. The actual question is so ambiguous as to not be of any value at all. Here's a better survey that makes the question being asked much clearer. This article says, despite years of negative news coverage relating to transgender rights and reformation of the Gender Recognition Act, a YouGov poll on behalf of Pink News has found that most women are in favor of trans people self-identifying as a gender other than that which they were assigned at birth. This is despite the ferocious efforts of anti-trans activists and billionaire fiction writers, J.K. Rowling, trying to conflate the progress of trans rights with a threat to women's rights. A massive 57% of women surveyed by YouGov for Pink News agreed that trans people should be able to self-identify as their chosen gender, compared with 43% of men from an overall sample of UK adults. This is a survey in the UK, not the US, and the survey was about self-identifying, not about sports. However, once you accept the right of transgender people to self-identify, the right to participate in sports is certain to follow. Once you accept that trans women are women, there is no logical way to exclude trans women from sports.
That is a most illogical attitude.
You need to keep telling people that trans women are women, trans men are men, until it becomes accepted by all of society. If you don't watch 911 Lone Star on Fox, you should. Brian Michael Smith, a trans actor, plays a transgender firefighter. He is doing an amazing job at bringing both the normalcy of the transgender population and the issues faced by them to light. If we had more actors like Brian and more media portrayal, a larger segment would see how normal this is.
Which is a good thing. It's still a shred of common sense, you would think, within our culture. I still think that as I look at this, my thing is only 60% agree with this.
Yeah.
Could you imagine asking this question, getting a poll on this question 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 or 40 years ago? It'd be so drastically different. Now, it's a good thing. That's still 60%, but
the people at AIG are always wanting to turn back the clock when it comes to values. If they had their druthers, how far would they turn the clock? All the way back to the 1st century? They don't like progressive values, like embracing the gender and sexuality spectrum, but they do allow women on the panel. Doesn't their Bible say something about a woman not teaching a man? Some of the fundamentalist churches don't think women should even be allowed to vote. I wonder about their thoughts on bringing back slavery. AIG does say that slavery is wrong because all people are equal before God. It's in some of their literature. But they make it sound like these values were better in the past. They weren't. If they really think there's harm in embracing transgender people as the sex they self-identify as, they should be giving us evidence as to why this is a bad thing. What actual harm does it cause? How does that affect well-being, and whose well-being is affected? Not just that your grandparents didn't think that way. My grandparents were racists. I'm glad I'm not trapped in such a narrow-minded way of thinking. To be fair, Avery did attempt to say why they think the transgender movement is harmful to transgender people in the video that I debunked a couple weeks ago, The Log in Avery's Eye. But the data Avery presented didn't support her conclusion, and the solution she presented was no solution at all. Her answer, as is their answer to everything, just believe God and He will fix it, in the next life. Your life here sucks, but don't worry, things will be better after you die. To accept this, you first have to show some evidence that there even is an afterlife. Then, if the only hope that a person has is in an afterlife, why not suicide? Their answer would be that if God didn't have a purpose for you here, he would take you, so you need to remain here for as long as he deems fit. People are supposed to just wait for a God they can't hear to tell them about a plan. What a waste. It's why I end all of my videos, live your life. I spent too many years trying to please a God that I only thought was there. A real God that cared would want life to be as good as it can be for everyone. For transgender people, that means embracing the identity that they feel inside. For everyone, it means exploring who your best self can be. If an all-powerful God actually has a good reason why this is wrong and has a better way of living, let him speak. Now, don't hold up your Bible and say, it's all in here, because it isn't. The Bible says something about cross-dressing, but nothing directly about being transgender. The closest it comes is God making Eve from Adam, God making a female from a male, and God said it was very good. The creation of the two was the only thing about which God said was very good. It seems to me that God not only doesn't oppose being transgender, but your God embraces it. If this is not what your God thinks, let him speak for himself, if he can.
But
If you go to actually the sport, people that they are in the sport, and they ask ask them what they're gonna say, because they're the one getting hurt.
Yes,
They're the one
exactly.
getting
yeah.
destroyed. For example, I'm from Brazil, and there's a case in Brazil that the man is just destroying all the girls playing. And it's just like, if you go there and ask them if they want him to be part of it, they're going to be like, no, we don't want that, because
Right.
that's not fair.
Yeah. And I think
Athletics and transgender is a difficult issue, but it is a relatively small area of sports. I looked up what Gabriella mentioned, and it was easy to find because I could find numerous articles about transgender women in sports in Brazil, but they were all about two people: Valentina Sampaio, the first transgender swimsuit model in Sports Illustrated, and Tiffany Abaru, the professional volleyball player who is likely to represent her country in the next Summer Olympics, when we finally get around to doing that. No one is complaining that Sampaio had an unfair advantage in being selected as a swimsuit model. So why is it a problem that Abaru is competing in women's volleyball? Some say that she has an unfair physical advantage. Perhaps she does. There are cis athletes that have physical advantages over others as well. Abaru didn't become an elite athlete by transitioning. Abaru was an elite male volleyball player before she transitioned. Abaru didn't transition because of sports. When Abaru transitioned, she thought her sports career was over. She told an interviewer with the Associated Press, "I didn't even know until recently that I could play volleyball again." Gabriella is wrong. Cis women are not being hurt by including trans women in sports. At AIG, they try to make it sound like trans women are consistently beating their cis competitors, but it isn't true. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. If the only injury you are facing is, "I didn't win, it's not fair," then you weren't injured. It's not like men are transitioning so that they can compete in women's sports. The prejudice they face far outweighs any physical advantage they might gain. According to the ACLU article, 4 Myths About Trans Athletes Debunked, many who oppose the inclusion of trans athletes erroneously claim that allowing trans athletes to compete will harm cisgender women. This divide and conquer tactic gets it exactly wrong. Excluding women who are trans hurts all women. It invites gender policing that could subject any woman to invasive tests or accusations of being too masculine or too good at their sports to be a real woman. People, this is not a slippery slope argument. We are already here. Just watch the debate on transgender women in sports on Modern Day Debate between Sargon and Brenton Lengel. Sargon says that a woman who can't reproduce is less of a woman. Ilya Moon pointed out that she, because of illness, cannot reproduce. Sargon flat out said that she was less of a woman than one who can. He was extremely rude. I brought up in the chat that I also cannot reproduce and was told by someone in the chat that I also am less of a woman. I've heard this in other places as well. The idea that some women are real women and other women are less so attempts to put women into first-class and second-class woman status. We certainly don't need another method to marginalize women. We also don't need men to tell us how to be women. Trans or cis, able to reproduce or not, all women are women. Back to the ACLU article. Women and girls who are trans face discrimination and violence that makes it difficult to even stay in school. According to the U.S. Trans Survey, 22% of trans women who were perceived as trans in school were harassed so badly that they had to leave school because of it. Another 10% were kicked out of school. The idea that women and girls have an advantage because they are trans ignores the actual condition of their lives. Dr. Joshua Safer, Executive Director of the Mount Sinai Center for Transgender Medicine and Surgery, says, "A person's sex is made up of multiple biological characteristics, and they may not all align as typically male or female in a given person. Many people who are not trans can have hormone levels outside the range considered typical of a cis person of their assigned sex. When a person does not identify with the sex they were assigned at birth, they must be able to transition socially, and that includes participating in sports consistent with their gender identity." According to Dr. Deanna Adkins, pediatric endocrinologist, excluding trans athletes can be deeply harmful and disruptive to treatment. "I know from experience with my patients that it can be extremely harmful for a transgender young person to be excluded from the team consistent with their gender identity." Let's look at this from a cost-benefit analysis. If we allow transgender girls and women to participate in women's sports, there are cis women who might lose who would otherwise have won had there been fewer competitors. The benefit is allowing girls and women to compete with other girls and women with whom they identify. If the goal is to promote the well-being of as many people as possible, it's a no-brainer in favor of including trans women. According to Dr. Adkins, when a school or athletic organization denies transgender students the ability to participate equally in athletics because they are transgender, that condones, reinforces, and affirms the transgender students' social status as outsiders or misfits who deserve the hostility they experience from peers. Believing and perpetuating myths and misconceptions about trans athletes is harmful. Denying trans people the right to participate is discrimination, and it doesn't just hurt trans people, it hurts all of us.
Yeah, and I think it's I have this term I use. It's bounce back with these things. Like you go so far to one side, so to speak, that you realize how absurd it is, right? You start to realize this is absurd. This isn't fair. This isn't right, and so you bounce back to a more conservative position. And I hope that they certainly do, because people need to realize, they want to talk about either having no genders, not being male or female.
Right.
But even if we do, we need to, but we need to understand that males and females are physically different. You cannot escape it. You can't escape that, right? They have bigger muscles, they have bigger hearts, they have bigger lungs, and all of those things give them advantages in sports over women.
Right.
So it's not fair for men to compete with women on those things.
And we need to.
Okay, Georgia, there are physical differences between men and women, but what you consistently fail to recognize, and I realize it's done deliberately because it's the only way to reinforce your view of the Bible, is that trans men are men and trans women are women.
We need to understand as Christians, the Bible is clear that men and women have equal value because
Right.
they're
Yeah,
made
it's not about
in,
value.
right? The value's the
Not
same.
about that.
But the Bible's also clear they are distinct, they are different, and they are complementary to each other for God's glory.
Yeah.
Right? And
No one is talking about equal value here, so I'm not sure why you brought it up. But since you did, the Bible is pretty clear that men and women are not of equal value. In the Old Testament, women were property. In the New, it says that there's no distinction. Yet they're both by the same God, and somehow he's not changed his mind on this, and it's always the same, even though several of the rules have changed from old to new. And the only thing that is clear is that the Bible is not clear.
God's glory. Right? And he assigns the role as the authoritative creator God. And so the biblical world,
God assigns the role. Please tell me how God gives you your assigned sex. When a baby is born, does the doctor hold it up and wait to hear from God the assigned gender role? No, that's ridiculous. It's people involved in the delivery that assign the sex of the baby, not God. Sometimes they get it wrong. Not surprising, people make mistakes. More importantly, there is no way to see at birth how a baby will think about himself or herself in the future. It is well-documented science that transgender people do have brain activity that matches that of the opposite gender better than that of their assigned sex. We can't change their brain activity, although I know that is exactly what you want to do. You think that transgender people can just stop thinking the way they do and start thinking the way you want them to. It's similar to 50 years ago when some people thought that the way to cure depression was simply to tell a depressed person to just snap out of it. And of course that works so well. Right and left, people were cured of depression just saying, I just needed someone to tell me to snap out of it. No. Telling people to think differently didn't work to cure depression, and it won't work to make transgender people into cisgender people. Transgender people can't just decide to accept life the way you want them to. If they try to do this, they are lying to themselves and to everyone else. Forcing them to live a lie is exhausting, it's demeaning, and for some people, impossible. Doesn't your Bible also say something about liars going to hell? So why do you tell people that they need to lie about who they are? What is actually stopping you from just accepting other people the way they are? How does this in any way impinge on your religious views? How does this cause any harm to you or your organization? And if it doesn't harm you, why do you feel the need to continually attack this small segment of the population? What good do you think you can actually do? Do you think that if everyone accepted your viewpoint, the lives of transgender people would actually be better or worse? The answer is clearly that it would be worse. We know that for a fact because it has only been recently that people are beginning to understand and accept transgender people for who they are. So why? Just why?
God. And so the biblical worldview can give us good answers on all of this. I think, but here's my thing. Could you imagine reading this sentence to someone who lived 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah.
I mean, a majority of American voters oppose allowing biological males to compete in women's sports.
Yeah.
They would be like, yes. And the point is, that's a question.
What are you
Why is
talking
that a
about?
question?
Just using the
Yeah,
definitions that we have. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
exactly. And I think too.
Again, when you phrase the question like that, of course you get the answer you want. But when you look at should women be allowed to participate in women's sports, the answer is a resounding yes. Trans women are women. Therefore, trans women should participate in women's sports. This is what shouldn't even be a question.
Exactly. And I think too, it's easy to talk about these things in theory. And well, do you think this is fair? And I think some people might say, yeah, that sounds fair. But like you were saying, what about when it comes to reality? What about when it's your daughter or son who's trying to get a scholarship, right, to go to
Right.
college, but
Yeah.
can't because the guy that's in the women's sports is better?
Right, yeah.
You know, I mean, that's when it starts to hurt.
Well, and the guy who's in the same locker room as your daughter.
Yes, exactly that too.
Yeah.
there's
It
that.
just-
Those issues as well.
Yeah.
Again, The whole issue is that you think trans women are men. They are not. It doesn't matter if it's my child or not. As most of you know, I do have a trans son, and no, this isn't a problem. He is male. Period. End of discussion.
All right, Supreme Court strikes down state ban on taxpayer funding for religious schools. So this is actually a bit of good news, a good Supreme Court decision that was made recently on basically saying, so this comes out of the state of Montana, and they were basically wanting to treat religious schools differently, and saying that they could not, so people that donated money to scholarships to allow students to go to private schools would not receive a tax credit if they went to a religious, basically, or private or religious school. And you can't do that, they said, because that's discriminating unfairly against the Christian schools or the religious schools.
Yeah.
Georgia should stick to stories in her field because she completely butchered this one. Later in the video, when they talk about the monkey experiment, watch how much they talk about making sure to read the article and not just the headline. Here, the reason Georgia makes the mistake she does is because the headline is misleading. Makes me wonder if she actually read the article. She didn't even get the facts right. And it's not surprising. She's using the report from Fox News. The article that Georgia is reading from is actually factually correct. I checked it. But the way that it is written, it is hard to follow. The coverage from NPR is much clearer. I also read the actual decision. The facts are consistent in each of these sources. What happened was Montana passed a bill that gave people a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for money donated to organizations for private scholarships. An organization called Big Sky started a program under this, and people gave money to the program. 12 of the 13 schools receiving money from the program were religious schools. The government looked at this and realized it was a de facto way of funneling public money into religious schools, which they saw as a violation of their Constitution's no-aid rule, which prohibits any aid to a school controlled by a church, sect, or denomination. So they made a rule that scholarship money received from the program couldn't be used for religious schools. 3 mothers that wanted the money to send their children to religious schools brought suit. The Montana Supreme Court saw that excluding religious schools from the program would be discrimination, and not excluding them caused them to violate their no-aid clause. So they shut the program down. The mothers appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Supreme Court held that the state must reinstate the program. In the majority opinion, Justice Roberts writes, a state need not subsidize private education, but once it decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools because they are religious. Thus, the tax credit created by the Montana legislature to benefit students attending qualifying private schools, including religious ones, must stand as originally designed. Roberts says of Montana's no-aid provision, the question presented is whether the Free Exercise Clause of the United States Constitution barred that application of the no-aid provision. The provision that the scholarships couldn't be used for religious schools does not zero in on any essentially religious course of instruction, but rather bars aid to a religious school simply because of what it is, a religious school. Roberts bases his decision not on a finding that there was no violation of separation of church and state, but on a finding that to not provide aid to religious schools because they are religious is to violate the free exercise of religion. He says that the no-aid provision was invalid, therefore there was no reason for the Montana Supreme Court to scrap the program. In her dissent, Ruth Bader Ginsburg points out that there was no discrimination. The state decided to shut down the entire program. Both religious and non-religious schools were in the same boat by the loss of the program. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, also writing separately, called the decision perverse for throwing the U.S. Constitution's religious clauses out of balance. Georgia says that people didn't get the tax credit if they went to a religious school. No. People who donated to the program got the tax credit. It was the use of the donated funds going to the religious schools that caused the problems, as they were funneled through a government program. Because the money was primarily going to religious schools, it was putting the government in the position of supporting religion by offering incentives for what turned out to be a primarily religious program. The problem was not about who was receiving the tax credit. This is actually a very complex case, and I don't think we've seen the last of it. Personally, I think it could be used to drain tax dollars into religious schools, defunding the public schools. But maybe I'm seeing too much in it. It does offer more schooling options to low-income families, so it is not entirely without merit. That religious institutions also benefit could be viewed as a neutral byproduct. We need to keep an eye on this in the future.
Yeah, every school is religious.
Yes.
Every school, they just have a different master.
Right. So we either have the religion of atheism, humanism, or Christianity, right?
Yeah.
Those are the
If public schools are atheist schools, then why are none of them called Somerville School of Atheism? Atheism is a lack of belief. Religion is a belief on faith, which would make the religion atheism accepting by faith that you have no beliefs. I can assure you, I do not need faith for this. I know I lack a belief in God or gods. There is no master atheist. If I had to pick my favorite atheist, it would probably be Matt Dillahunty. But I have never considered calling him master. Sorry, Matt.
But like you said, Dr. Haynes, every school is religious. I was a teacher for 13 years. My wife was too. Taught in public schools for a long time. And the inherent worldview that's implicit in the secular schools in our culture is naturalism, atheism. You can and must explain all things without God, based in humanism.
Make up your mind. Is it naturalism, humanism, or atheism? They aren't the same.
And let me just say, we often say this, it's not that there aren't good people in that system. I have many good friends who are Christians, they're strong believers in glorifying God, trying to be the light in dark places, but the system itself is inherently atheistic. And we got to realize that there is no neutrals. That's a false claim you see again and again.
Yeah. And it's funny.
You say you know of good Christians in the public school system. Do you know any good atheists? Do you agree that atheists can be good people too? This was something that nagged at me all the time that I was a Christian. I have a secular aunt that is a really good person. Hi, Marianne, if you're watching. The picture of atheists and humanists that we were given in the churches was always of sinful people. And while I didn't agree with everything my aunt did, she also didn't even come close to the picture that was painted for me of an unbeliever. She was definitely a humanist. She always strove for what she saw as the best for humanity. I can't say the same thing about the Christian God. Pity.
Yeah. And it's funny that you said that because someone just commented public schools should be neutral, but there's no such thing as neutrality, right? You're either teaching for God or you're teaching against God, right?
And
there's no in between.
Why neutrality? Neutrality is already a worldview.
Right.
So why neutrality?
Now neutrality is a worldview too. I think Robin might like this one. Neutralists. Note the tribalism. Whoever is not for us is against us. That is in the Bible. But so is the contrary statement, whoever is not against us is for us. You put yourself at the center of everything.
No.
So, and they talked about that this went against the First Amendment's free exercise clause. Okay, so we need to, and we'll talk about that one a little bit later. Hopefully, we'll have time to get to that. But we need to know what the Constitution says. We need to know what the amendments are to that Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and know what the rights of Christians are. Because I'm glad that parents of children that attended a religious private school sued. They said this is unfair. This is wrong.
Yeah.
This shouldn't be allowed. And that's what we have to do. We have to stand up for our rights as Christians, or they're going to be taken away from us. And I don't like that they have to sue. I don't like that they have to go to court to do this, but that is the means in our country by which we can gain that fairness, so to speak, or try to get that fairness and stop that discrimination from happening.
Mm-hmm.
That is good. By the way,
Georgia is back to the Supreme Court case. She sounds like she's saying she didn't realize that the free exercise clause was in the Constitution. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but that's my take from her statement that people need to know the Constitution. She's not wrong. The better people know the Constitution, the better they understand their rights. Maybe we could get people to stop saying the government has no right to require you to wear a mask. They most certainly do. Just as they can require you to have a driver's license if you want to operate a vehicle on a public roadway, they can require you to wear a mask if you want to be out in public. It's not only the right, but it is also the duty of government to pass laws for the welfare of the people. In a pandemic, that means passing laws governing keeping people safe in public. They can require you to be clothed in public. They can require you to wear a mask. I'm off topic, but I don't think that can be said too many times.
And one thing I was thinking too, because Justice Roberts, because he made this decision, and well, he was the one that was the swing vote basically, but they made a decision just a few weeks ago though, in which he was a swing vote in the wrong way, because it's going to question whether religious schools can remain religious, because they will have to not be biased against individuals who are LGBT, QIA, whatever it is, whatever letter we're up to now. And that's going to be a problem.
Growing. It's evolving.
Right.
That's a good point. I think even there are many judges and lawyers who have mentioned that already with the current rulings from many different courts, including the Supreme Court. There's a conflict, a direct conflict between the religious freedom that we have established in the Constitution and this new sexual agenda freedom that's being pushed in our culture at large. So which one wins out? And we're going to see more of this as we go through on these issues in our culture.
Yep.
Most likely, Georgia is referring to Bostick versus Clayton County, Georgia. In that case, the court ruled that a religious group can't fire an employee for being gay, lesbian, transgender, non-binary, etc. It was a huge win for the LGBTQ plus community. But it really takes away nothing from religion. Religious groups are under no obligation to hire members of the community. They just can't fire them for their sexual preferences or gender status.
Yep, definitely. Okay, humans and monkeys show similar thinking patterns. Okay, so when I first read this, I'm like, oh, I can make so many jokes out of this. looking at what's happening today sometimes, especially in the years of political elections and all of those things, but I'll refrain from that. Okay, so it says...
Then I'll do it for you, Georgia. A chimpanzee would be more compassionate than the ape we currently have in the White House. No, sorry. I take that back. Calling Trump an ape is an insult to apes. My apologies to apes everywhere, including my fellow apes. Except for Trump.
So it says our ways of thinking are a lot more similar than previously thought. And so basically they do this study to try to show that that monkeys have a knack for what's called recursion. And basically and I'll just read the definition because I had no idea what recursion was. So it's a cognitive process of arranging words, phrases, or symbols in a way that helps convey complex commands, sentiments, and ideas. Okay, so that's recursion.
And really quick, this is another good example. Whenever you read these sort of headlines, be sure you get past the headline. Read the actual article. You said you actually read the actual study. And if you do so, you start to see that the titles typically are very exaggerated to grab your attention. The actual meat is much less than usually, and I think that's the case here too, right?
Right.
You are right, Brian. If Georgia had read the article about the tax credits in the Montana case, she would have seen that the headline was misleading. But unfortunately, she either just read the headline or she skimmed the article and didn't pick up that who was getting a tax credit wasn't the subject matter of the case.
Right. And so, when you look at the actual study, basically they trained the monkeys to do this, okay? So they basically had them memorize symbols, and if they did it a certain way, they got a treat, okay, for doing it that way. They didn't do that with the humans, okay? Right?
Now we get to the sinful science part. You be the judge. Whose science is sinful, mine or Georgia's? I usually skip the science areas covered by AIG as my science background is limited. I took high school science and freshman college biology, but that was 40 years ago, and I don't remember much of it. I'm currently working through Khan Academy, and I'm still refreshing high school chemistry. I wanted to show that even with as little science understanding as I have, I can see through the incongruity of what AIG is telling their audience. But if I mess this up, please tell me. I do want to be accurate. I also read the actual study. I've linked it in the description if you want to check it out. Much of the study was beyond my comprehension. First, why is Georgia making a distinction between the training given? You suggested that we read the actual article. I did. It's right here. As to the training given, it says, researchers tested the recursive skills of 10 U.S. adults, 50 preschoolers and kindergartners, 37 members of the Tismeni, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. They are a people group in the Amazon who have had very little contact with the outside world. They have no knowledge of computers. And 3 male macaque monkeys. First, all participants were trained to memorize different sequences of symbols in a particular order. It doesn't say that only the monkeys were trained. It says they trained all participants. Now, the rewards given were different. The monkeys did get snacks. The U.S. humans got computer sounds, which we are trained in our culture to recognize as a reward. The Tismani people, who don't have computers in their culture, were given verbal feedback. Interestingly, all test subjects did test on computers except the Tismani people. They used note cards and pens. So all the test subjects were rewarded for correct answers. The rewards just varied based on what the test subjects would consider a reward. Is George's complaint that the human subjects didn't get snacks? Is that the way your brain works, Georgia? If I don't get a snack, I didn't get a reward? It sounds like you're saying your brain works more like a chimpanzee brain than that of an adult in the United States. Interesting.
Okay. Right? Because humans and monkeys are different.
Right.
And they had to train them to do it. It's not like a monkey taught another monkey how to do it, okay? A human had to teach a monkey how to do it. Only by positive feedback, basically, were they able to continue to do it. And even then, they still scored. I looked at the paper. They still scored well below the humans.
One thing that
The first thing Georgia is complaining of here makes no sense. The monkeys were trained by humans and not other monkeys. Why would she expect otherwise? The humans were also trained by other humans. The ones who designed and ran the experiment were all humans. Is she expecting monkeys to design experiments and ask for human test subjects? She says the monkeys didn't then turn to and train other monkeys. No, nor did the humans then turn to other human test subjects and train them. That wasn't the experiment. Why does she expect the experiment to go in a direction it was never designed to go? Was she expecting them to put monkeys in one room and humans in another and just tell them to develop a language and see what happens? Might be interesting, but that wasn't the experiment. And next she says that only by giving monkeys food could they continue to do it. That's not what the paper says. In one portion of the experiment, they gave reinforcement to the monkeys and humans for any response, whether correct or incorrect, and the monkeys still gave more correct responses than would be expected by chance. She also skipped telling you about the part where they tested to see if memory capacity was a factor, and a couple of the human children had to be taken out of the test group because they failed the memory test to continue. The monkeys did not fail the memory test. Next, Georgia implies that the fact that the monkeys scored below the humans is proof that the experiment failed. No one expected the monkeys to do as well as the humans. The experiment was to see if the monkeys had any capacity at all for recursion, not to see if they were as good at recursion as the humans.
One thing that we all have to be very careful, it's when we see a research, we have to check how they did that, the method that they used. So they used 10 people from the United States, 50 preschoolers, 37 members of, I think, from Bolivia, and 3 monkeys. So
That's
it
a good
just
point.
you train those 3.
Yeah.
So
You trained
I'm
them, yeah.
telling you, if you get anyone, and if you have my cat, whew, my cat's gonna score really high because they're trained by me. So, so you know what? It just
If Gabriella thinks she can train her cat to sequence mathematical figures into formulated patterns as was done here, and then have the cat transfer that learning to new data not seen before and put it together in similar patterns, she has a truly remarkable cat. I'm sure the researchers at Berkeley would be delighted to continue the experiment on her cat as well as other species of animals that are capable of such reasoned thinking. I'm wondering why, since Gabriella thinks her cat can exhibit language skills if trained by her, she hasn't brought a talking cat to the show.
Kitty, did you do this?
No.
Are you positive?
Yes.
Sylvester, you've been here all day. Who do you think did it?
The dog.
It should also be noted that the hypothesis of the researchers that the monkeys would not be able to do the tasks given them. The researchers indicated more than one time in the paper that they were surprised by the results. They even had to modify the experiment to be sure they weren't getting the results they were getting for the wrong reasons. The implication here that the researchers found what they wanted to is a misrepresentation of the research.
When you do that, when you check the research and the method that they use, you're going to see the difference. That's what we need to do. And one thing that's different that I have seen a lot is they have one result and the conclusion is totally the opposite. Totally the opposite. So we need to be very careful. Unfortunately, they're trying to prove their ideas.
They're definitely exaggerating the conclusion, no doubt about that. I mean, if they really wanted.
Now Brian and Gabriella both claim that the paper draws erroneous conclusions from the data and that they have exaggerated the results. Yet neither one says where the paper was erroneous or exaggerated. If you're going to make the claim that you see errors in scientific findings, you need to support your claims. Simply saying they are wrong is unconvincing and has no value in finding truth. The only way this can be convincing is if you are trained to just accept it on faith.
That. I mean, if they really wanted to know, why didn't they just ask the monkeys and talk to them?
I know. I mean,
But you can't, right? Because there's a distinct difference. And even if there are some similar patterns in the way that these brains function that God made for us, the results are
This is exactly what the experiment proved. A minute ago, you said the results were exaggerated and erroneous, and now you accept exactly what the experiment showed. Make up your mind.
the results are so drastically different.
Right.
We were talking earlier about what can we as humans do with our speech, how we can talk and interact and communicate, how we add punctuation, how we can accent our sounds in different ways, how we can talk about deep things. We can think about thinking. Think about that. I mean, that's a lot of thinking going on that's beyond what animals can do.
Every
because we're unique.
animal.
No one is saying that monkeys and humans think the same. Straw man.
Animal communicate
Yeah.
in a different
Oh, yeah,
way.
no one doubts
Every
that.
animal does that. So it doesn't show anything. One thing that I thought it was interesting because they used the word evolution. This new study shed new light on our understanding of the evolution of language. It's a wrong way to use this word. It's not evolution, it's just development. It just so they're just using the word evolution here, and that's what we need to be careful with, because this is the world viewed in action. Because they have this idea of human and apes being together, they use the word evolution, but that doesn't mean that it has nothing to do with evolution.
Right. And it's not
Evolution is change over time. Evolution here of language is similar to evolution of species. Different process, yes. Different thing evolving, yes. But both evolve. It can be clearly demonstrated that language evolves to the point where even you cannot deny it. The only way you can deny evolution of species is to claim that they are two different things, as you do here. And again, you make the claim with no support. Gabriella says they are different, but she gives no evidence of a difference or even an explanation of how they are different. They're just different. You have to take it on faith.
Right, and it's not like these monkeys are like we use this recursion. We use it in our language when we talk, so it has to do with how we arrange words and things like that. But they're just using symbols for the monkeys, okay? So because they can't read and they can't understand like we can. We can punctuate things, we can edit, we can correct, we can do all of that. The monkeys can't do that, right?
They use the same symbols for the humans as they did for the monkeys. They use mathematical symbols because they would be unfamiliar to all the groups except the human adults from the US. The Tismane people didn't use higher mathematics in their culture. The toddlers also have not been taught mathematics. The purpose was to choose symbols foreign to most of the test subjects. They would be familiar to the U.S. human adults, but their inclusion tests how the symbols being familiar affects the results. Georgia is again mischaracterizing the experiment.
Right? So it just, again, goes to show we have to look past the headline. And like you said, too, I think you said before we got on the air about, I mean, our brains, I mean, God designed all of those brains, right? And it's not surprising that they do some of the things that we do, or can at least be taught some of the things that we do.
That's just design.
But
Same designer.
it's still different. It's not the same. Monkeys aren't teaching monkeys, like I said. It's people teaching the monkeys.
Now Georgia is trying to explain why the results show monkeys' thinking patterns to be similar to human thinking patterns. They have accepted the factual accuracy of the study. Georgia's only problem with the results is that the monkeys didn't do the teaching. No one is saying that humans and monkeys are the same, only that we have similar thinking patterns. I don't know why you want a monkey to teach this. Maybe we should have a monkey panel for Answers News. I think the educational level of the program would be about the same. I think that's enough for today. Let me know what you think about my first attempt to pick apart some of the science of AIG. Can someone with as little background as I have do a sufficiently competent job? Or am I as guilty as AIG of sinful science? Thank you so much to all of my patrons. Without your encouragement, I wouldn't be able to keep putting out the content that I do. Until next time, live your life. It doesn't say that only the